Hi, everyone. Happy Wednesday night. If you are watching here and have joined us before, it's the Better Nutrition Program expert interview series. I'm Ashley Koff. I'm thrilled to host this. And the whole purpose of this and the Better Nutrition Program is to connect patients and practitioners with better nutrition tools so that we can get the better health results that we deserve. And tonight's topic came about in a really interesting way. So I'm thrilled to have my guest. I'll introduce you in a second. And I was checking out all the stuff that she does on her website, and I'm like, oh my gosh, there are all these different things that we could talk about. And when this topic came up, I felt like it was such an important one for us to talk about. So if you are a practitioner who deals currently with patients who have experienced trauma, or maybe you've even been nervous to ask about it, one of the things we're going to talk about tonight is how to venture into those areas, because a lot of us as dietitians have not been trained as therapists, or therapists may not have been trained as dietitians. So that is a perfect way to introduce Amy Helms, who is joining us tonight. And as her website points out, nutrition and therapy. Amy, you have a really interesting background, and I thought we could start with kind of how you came to wanting to work at the intersection of these two. Of course, because it brings in my favorite school ever, which is my alma mater, Duke. So I thought we could talk about that. Welcome.
Well, I ended up coming both out of kind of unforeseen circumstances. My background is as a dietitian. I went to school at Rush University in Chicago, and we did get to do a 2-week rotation wherever we wanted, and I chose to do that at Duke at their Wellness Life Center where they worked with individuals with binge eating disorder, and was just fascinated by it. And so that kind of fell my love for eating disorders. Then got my first job in Augusta, Georgia, moved there, and several years later ended up moving to work at a treatment center in Columbia, South Carolina. 9 months later, it closed. So I was like, what am I going to do? So went back to school. And so that is why I'm doing now the therapy and nutrition. Working with eating disorders is kind of more of a counseling role anyways. Mm-hmm. But I thought, well, let's learn more about it so I can be more effective at the job. And there's not many people that do it. And I thought it could be a niche.
Yeah. It's so interesting. And if I joke about these things, I use humor as a vehicle for communication. So for anyone watching, I never want you to think that I'm belittling or making fun of an experience. I often will make fun of my own naivete. And so when I first started practicing as a dietitian, I did not understand how invaluable it would have been to have had therapy training. Therapists actually, when they train, go and have to actually get therapy themselves. Like that's part of the experience. And for dietitians, I feel like not having that has really been a challenge. And I always say, I never learned to be a therapist. I never learned that side of it. So I often will tell people what to do instead of actually listening to them, and hearing and helping them on their own pathway. So I think it's incredible that you are, at that intersection. So we talked about a bunch of different topics and netted out in this conversation tonight around trauma. And I think this is so important today because of recent, I can think of about 4 or 5 different individuals. So one woman that I was working with had a history. She only as an adult has kind of found that she was bullied as a child, and just how that bullying at school, what that actually, did to her throughout this time period, right? And then also when I was in DC, more so, dealing with the caregivers for our wounded veterans and wounded warriors, and sort of kind of understanding not if you yourself haven't experienced the quote unquote trauma, you have experienced trauma, a traumatic experience, as watching someone you love go through trauma, and kind of these different pieces. So I'm just fascinated by this topic. So for those of you just joining us, it's Amy Helms, and we're going to take questions along the way. You can let us know how where you're joining from, or if you have any specific questions. But I thought we would dive into, I always like starting off with a definition, with like kind of the lexicon. So let's talk about what is trauma, and then we'll fold into how the body experiences trauma.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's a great question, because I think the definition that people assume trauma is someone coming home from the war. Mm-hmm. And, having a wound or having those flashbacks of being back at the war. But trauma is anything where someone has perceived threat or danger or either witness someone else is having done that. So it can be so many things. And so you have trauma, and then you also have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And not everyone that goes through trauma will develop that. So some people go through trauma and are fine after it. And then others will develop symptoms and it will adversely affect them. So trauma can be a car accident. It can be a broken bone. It can be watching a loved one go through an illness, go through it yourself, bullying, the war, a sexual assault. So it can be so many different things. So there's a wide variety, and some people don't even know that they've had a trauma, but they experience symptoms. It can be misdiagnosed because it's something they wouldn't be common trauma. So I think that there's a lot of different things.
It makes a ton of sense. So when we think about that trauma, and we understand that there is a difference between short-term and historic trauma, so immediate, like something you just recently experienced. And to your point, maybe I should also add there's aware. So if we're conscious of our trauma, and then there's also subconscious trauma. So what actually happens to the body, both in the acute moment? Let's start there with when the body experiences trauma. And then let's look at the second part of what happens perhaps as the body tries to suppress that trauma or tries to manage that trauma.
Okay, can I be a dork for a minute?
Yeah, totally, yes.
So this is my handy tool that I use with patients.
I love it. Okay.
It acts the brain. It's a little glove. And on the front, you have like the prefrontal cortex. And that is where we process, is something safe? Are we okay? Do I perceive danger? So that's the most developed portion of the brain. It develops last. Okay. So around 25, 28. So that's why it's so important to get, the proper nutrition later in life. So someone who's gone through trauma, this part stops working. And so to decipher the difference between safe and not safe isn't there. So there's actually changes in that part of the brain. So if you flip it up, it's called the flip. The amygdala is underneath. That part is what's responsible for the sympathetic arousal. So you have the sympathetic nervous system, that's fight, flight, or freeze. The parasympathetic nervous system, that's the calm down, we're okay. So someone with trauma has more of the sympathetic nervous system, does not have the parasympathetic nervous system. So you might be working with someone and see the shoulders raised, tense, not able to settle down. That's because it's always on guard, waiting for something to happen. Someone just can't relax. That's because the sympathetic nervous system's on fire. So you have a lot of chemical changes going on. It's an inflammatory response. You have more cortisol, more cytokines, and all those chemicals circulating in the body. So someone with, trauma, whether it's short-term or long-term, that's the way they can't just get over it. It's because there's so much going on within the body.
I love it. Okay, so what we're going to do moving forward when we talk about better nutrition for trauma, we're going to get into the tips and the tools and resources. And thank you. You're getting some hearts. So I just wanted to tell you, I'm the host tonight. So I think a lot of people love the glove on that part. So in terms of trauma, I think one of the things that I was hearing two parts. One is what happens when we've got more of the sympathetic versus the parasympathetic. It's always a hard one because you think the sympathetic would be the relaxed, and that kind of a thing. So we'll come back to sort of what nutrients and foods, and then also from an inflammatory standpoint. I think that, I'm hearing both sides of those. So let's talk for a moment about, as a practitioner, how can you, if somebody is not coming in and saying, hey, I was just in a car accident and I think I might have digestive issues or, whatever as a result of that. But let's say that somebody comes to you and they're just coming to you for digestive issues. Well, when you were just talking to me about the parasympathetic and the sympathetic, I know that if we have an overactive sympathetic compared to parasympathetic, you're more likely to have some digestive stuff going on, whether it might be some reflux or some constipation. So in your experience, what are ways that practitioners and patients can start to connect where we can get to that information of maybe there was actually a trauma and that was at the cause of it, instead of thinking that, hey, it's something that I eat or I don't eat, that kind of a thing?
Right. For that, I would ask, when does it occur? What happens immediately before? What happens after? Does it occur in specific situations? When you experience it, do you feel anything anywhere else in the body? Because in trauma, that's happening because blood's going to the extremities. It's going away from the stomach, because with the, fight or flight, you need blood in the extremities to get away. So that happens in animals too, in the wild. So, people may feel full. They say, I can't eat. That's what we see with eating disorder patients. I'm anxious. I can't eat. I feel full. Or on the adverse, people may want to eat to make the nausea go away. So asking, does this happen in the morning or at night in public places? If you're with people, without people, just to kind of narrow down if there's, certain situations that, may be a trigger.
And what about when we're covering a lot? So thank you for the grace of dancing around on all of this. What about for the person I was describing who didn't realize that, and we started to unpack it, but didn't realize that she had actually been experiencing constipation for her whole life. And one of the things that she realized was that she was bullied when she was young. She was actually beaten up by kids at school. So we're not even talking about just verbal bullying, all of it falling under the category and having the potential for being extremely traumatic. But her experience was she did not want to go to the bathroom in school. And it took a lot, for her it was my work, but the work with the therapist, I think that really got us up there. So so as practitioners, it's pretty hard, for us to, or even as an individual, it's hard for us to figure out something that was back in our childhood. Any recommendations on that part?
I think with that, it does take work with a therapist as well. But, situations like I can't go in public versus I can go at home. That would be a big clue, because that would either be something like, an obsessive compulsive disorder or social. There would be something behind that. I'm working with a patient now that can't go in public restrooms because she's afraid of the water coming out and getting on her. So, that would be a clue. Can you go at home versus public? Because would there be a fear of someone attacking her in the restroom? Or so just getting those situational cues.
So I think that's really interesting. And one of the things that I'm hearing from you is that it's really important to ask more questions rather than to just say, I can't go to the bathroom, here's some fiber, right? Or to your point, are you able to go number 2 at home, or is it when you're out? So we have to dive a little bit deeper. Is that when you do your
right?
Do you do
so it's not
intake?
just if you're asking someone to log their intake, you wouldn't give them MyFitnessPal. You would give them a log with who were you with, what were you doing, how did you feel, and things like that.
So I think that's super valuable information. I can't underscore it enough for anyone joining us today, or whether we're live or into the future. I created the Better Nutrition journals very differently than a lot of the food logging systems, and it's really based on that notion of being able to ask questions like, how did you feel in the morning? How you feel in the morning is going to impact the food choices that you made. And what Amy's suggesting here is even going further. I think it's so unbelievably valuable, especially if it's something that you notice tends to occur in that feels like it's situational. We'll sometimes call it a food mood journal, but I think more than a food mood journal, it sounds like it's more of a food situation journal, sort of experiential on that part. probably also why it's really important for anyone listening tonight, before you go to your practitioner, or if you're interested in connecting with Amy, it would probably be really valuable to take 5 or even 10 days where you actually note what's going on for you and how you feel, rather than looking at 1 or 2 days. We have this tendency to do like a 1-day journal because it's all we have time for, and then we're judging ourselves in 1 day. So I think that that part doesn't end up being as helpful on that part. Okay, so again, we are going to get to the better nutrition component. What do we recommend for people from a trauma standpoint? But I also wanted to talk about one area that I think goes under supported, one group of patients, and those are the caregivers of people who are going through who are going through health issues or their own traumas. And so that notion, a lot of times, my experience has been that a lot of times those individuals are not perceiving that they are experiencing trauma. So when you are working in your work, how do you work with someone who is not the person who's maybe experiencing the disease or as you said, had gone to war or was the victim or any of that part, but actually the person who is trying to help them or is their caregiver?
Yeah, and making sure that that person's getting support too, and some form of self-care, taking time outs. Do they have any kind of respite care if they need? Proper nutrition themselves, encouraging healthy exercise if it's appropriate, local support groups if they're available, because that's caregiver burnout is so high. So making sure that person has support.
And do you feel that the nutrition is going to be similar in terms of what their body needs from if they're caring for someone who's gone through that trauma, or is that really dependent on the degree to which they're experiencing how caregiving is impacting them?
I think sometimes the caregiver can put themselves on the back burner and put so much energy on the person they're taking care of that just emphasizing that, you can't take care of someone else unless you're taking care of yourself first. So making sure that, their needs are a priority too.
Great. So now let's dive into, I'm getting the nutrition part. All right. So let's dive into foods and any protocols that you think are just top of the line in terms of, at any phase in your life, if you're dealing with and looking for healing from trauma. Obviously, food is not the only part, but there are things that you can give your body to help it run better and help it heal.
Well, definitely, and there is some research out there supporting it. So one of the main things is, because we are trying to rewire the neuroplasticity of the brain, is you have to have carbohydrates. You can't do low carb, keto, anything like that. But we want it to be, whole grain, the complex, the good carbs. And then we're looking at an inflammatory process. So we don't want to load up on inflammatory producing foods. We want to do the anti-inflammatory. So omega-3s, turmeric, ginger, cherries, pomegranate, cinnamon, all the things that we know can have the anti-inflammatory effect. It's debatable, but animal meat can be inflammatory. So, tending towards the plant-based diet can be better, but making sure we get plenty of protein with that to reduce that inflammatory process.
It's fascinating that you say to me the carbohydrate piece, because I think that, the ketogenic diet is just so popular right now, right? Or just the notion of giving up carbohydrates. And I think there's been confusion about giving up carbohydrates, maybe lumping carbohydrates with sugar in that space. So in the role of healing, what is your take on sugar as opposed to carbohydrates? Or I should say added sugar versus carbohydrate?
So the focus is on carbohydrate, not sugar, because there is a big difference. So complex carbohydrate and limiting the refined sugar. Because, the brain relies on carbohydrate for energy. And since, there's so much healing in the brain, you need the complex carbohydrate. We don't need sugar, we need carbohydrate.
Got it. Okay, good. So remember that. We might love sugar, but we don't need it. But we do need that carbohydrate. I think that's so important for that mood, for your energy. You guys know I'm a huge fan of magnesium. So remember, like, only 1% of your magnesium is in your blood. So a blood test isn't going to tell us. That's why we use the magnesium evaluation in order to see if your foods and your supplements are aligning to give your body enough magnesium, which helps, turn off that stress response. So that's another question that I had personally. Are there any supplements that, when you look at total nutrition, you say, you know what, it's going to be pretty hard to get this in from a food standpoint. Let's look at the supplement standpoint. Is that something that you're working with, or?
The turmeric with the quercetin, and I can never pronounce that right.
Yeah, you did. You got
vitamin D. Everyone's vitamin D deficient. Magnesium is one. And then the omega fatty acids.
Yeah.
I don't think you need a vitamin D test for that one, but I think those are the ones that are pretty good.
Yeah, it's so hard. I mean, I always say to people, yes, you could have too much vitamin D. First of all, if you're taking a ton of it, but we're talking that 50,000 IU, regularly. But unless you're like pretty much freebasing wild salmon, like somebody said the other day, oh my gosh, I had shiitakes on my pizza. Do you think I need my vitamin D supplement? And I was like, absolutely. Here we go. So we want to remember you'd have to eat it's a crazy amount in terms of, and it's about, 8 to 10 glasses of milk in a day if you wanted to get enough vitamin D, and that's just your baseline. So, I think that vitamin D recommendation, is so strong. So in terms of the work that you do you set it up as, so if somebody's interested in saying that they've listened or they're thinking about, hey, I've experienced trauma and I want to connect with a practitioner, and I've kind of been looking for somebody who could handle both the, help me with both the therapy and the nutrition side. Tell me a little bit about how you work with someone. Is it consistently on a weekly basis? Do you have them do, is it food journal derived, or is it more on what I would think of on the therapy side, which is come in and let's talk through some of this? It's so interesting to me that you're doing both of those.
So it depends on the person and what the trauma is. And, I'm working with someone that was recently in the car accident. There was a pretty severe car accident. And so a lot of trauma work is exposure therapy. And so, I go out on the road with them. And, small steps. We did imaginal first, and then, a small drive and then a longer drive just to get used to being in the car again. Mm-hmm. So, for different traumas, it would be different. But with the nutritional aspect, kind of work it in together. It would be different for different traumas.
Yeah. Oh, I think that's, you just helped me remember something. I was in a pretty bad car accident a couple of years ago, and it was in the rain on a highway. So if I'm in the rain on the highway, I'm like, forget about it. And it's funny, I was just in LA where everybody's a horrible driver in the rain. And if you tell me that's not a truth, whatever. I lived there for 15 years. I promise you. The rain is scary in LA. And I was just in a taxi, same exact situation. And the driver was I was in the car, and I'm like, I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to say anything. I'm like, you know what? I didn't say anything last time. And then this guy got in this car accident. I almost lost my life, so it's flashing right in my brain. And I said, so you need to slow down. I was like, I don't care how long it takes us to get there, but you need to slow down. He pointed to his wheel. He's like, I'm going 55. And in my brain, I was like, he must be going 85. But you know what's interesting? Yeah. And as you were saying that, I realized I am sure that I was not breathing that entire time. So when we talk about that part of it, so that was my segue into, what is the role of breathing, and is there any particular breathing technique or work that you do around that in terms of helping people, not from a food standpoint, but from a breathing standpoint, in this space?
Well, I do body scans first, looking, head to toe. So sometimes I'm, squeezing a muscle and letting it go, and then from head to toe and then toe to head. Driving, you might find yourself squeezing really tight, and then that can cause neck and shoulder and back pain. And then people go to the doctor and say, well, my neck and back hurt, but they don't know it's from trauma. They just know it's from being tense all day. But, so a breath in stimulates the sympathetic nervous system, and exhale stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. So take a short breath in and a long exhale will calm the body.
Interesting.
So between doing like the body scans and doing long exhales, it can calm everything down.
Oh, that's interesting, because you were talking in the beginning about how the person who's experiencing trauma may be even more of that sympathetic. So what you're saying is actually the longer exhale, because a lot of times we hear about these breathing that's like, just breathe in and breathe out, but that emphasis on the longer. That's great. Okay, so I have a question here about children. I had a question here that I think is too long to go into about football and helmets and the whole. But you did say at the beginning how important it is, because the front of our brain actually develops 25 to 30, like sort of in that age range. But her particular question is, what do you do for a child when they've experienced trauma? So we talked a little bit about the food. And I know you have two kids, 6 and 9. So traumas happen all the time. First of all, sometimes I think we try to treat it like it's not a trauma. Like, when they fall, it's like, okay, it's okay. Like they're up there moving around. But of course there are those serious experiences. I just had a friend whose son fell off of a trampoline, and they were in the hospital, and he's not remembering anything. He is doing well now. But, what's sort of nourishing in that part? What's the protocol after those experiences?
For nutrition, it's going to be the same, sometimes more calories. And then being aware that the signs are going to be different for children that have gone through trauma. A lot of times you're acting out behaviorally, maybe withdrawn, isolation, changes in appetite. So just things to look out for. And because, behavior is communication.
Yeah.
And so if a child's acting differently, then there's a sign that something may be wrong.
And that's probably hard. I can already hear the parents watching saying like, well, yeah, but when they turn 12 or, or whatever, the behavior changes anyway. Cause it's, like my typically happy child suddenly becomes, whatever through that experience. So, is there, like, from an assessment standpoint?
Younger children, younger than 12. 12 and 13, everyone's acting weird.
Yeah.
But, like young children.
Younger children. Got it. Yeah, I think that makes a ton of sense. And then, in terms of where we were talking about that brain formation, so, you were saying how important it is to get in those nutrients when you're younger. So, that is a given. Why we do what we do is to try to create awareness and raise healthier kids and healthier young adults. So let's say none of that happened, right? So like my mom always jokes with me and she's like, I know, I didn't breastfeed you. I said, no, it was all the antibiotics that you gave me when I was younger. That's really, what I talked to my therapist about, right? What it did to my gut. So, let's say you're 45 and you're dealing with a trauma and you know that you didn't have good nutrition when you were younger. Maybe there was some, just either you didn't know about it or there was some disordered eating or whatever on that part. How can you move forward from that piece in terms of, is it about replenishing certain nutrients, or what would be a dietary protocol that you would look for?
That would just be pretty much the same thing, doing the best you can. We can do like micronutrient testing to see if there are any deficiencies and then replenish on an individualized basis. So I do one test through SpectraCell and look at micronutrients and then replenish as needed. But that would be so individualized, it would be hard to make a widespread recommendation.
Brilliant. That was exactly the answer I was looking for. You see why I connect you guys with experts. It was a layup, or it was intended to be a layup question, because what I really wanted Amy to get into, and it's one of the things that I really sparked to on her site, is she does a lot of diagnostic testing. And while I'm a huge believer and created a company around better nutrition tools because there's a lot that we can't learn from testing, there is a ton that we can learn from testing. And if you're just going in and getting the typical blood work done, that's unlikely to tell us about actually does your body have what it needs to run better. So someone like Amy is going to be an excellent resource to be able to get that testing done. Amy, are there any limitations if somebody wants to have testing done? Do they have to work with you in your state, or how does that work in terms of if somebody's listening and they want to have micronutrient testing done?
Well, I'm licensed in 3 states, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Georgia, and I've been able to get reciprocity in some other states. to do that. So it just depends.
Okay. So the good thing is
For those who don't understand what that means.
Yes.
I've been able to work with people in other states by contacting the local state and been able to work with people. So, but I'm definitely able to do North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. And so by contacting another state can do it there.
Great. That I was going to decode for some people watching where they're like, what's the licensing situation? But the good news is for you to understand in that part, that you can reach out to Amy at nutritionandtherapy.com. You'll see on her site, just as I did, that that it's very clear, here's what I work on. And then that there's another part where it's talking about the testing. And my recommendation is to just give her a shout out there, and ask, especially if you have a question on a state by state basis. So, wow, I'm so impressed. And it's such a deep and deeply personal topic. But I think that one of the things that you bring so much value to is that link of really tackling things from a nutrition and therapy standpoint. And so, it's really nice to know sometimes we think, gosh, I've got to find this practitioner and this practitioner. And now you're like, nope, I actually am bringing both of those things together in that space. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. And Amy will be answering, just like for any of our guests, will be answering any questions if they come up at any point in time. If you're watching this and it's weeks from now, we're glad that you found us and we're able to watch this. So she'll answer questions. You can always tag her at Nutrition and Therapy in your question. Otherwise, if I see the question pop up there or my team at the Better Nutrition Program, we'll go ahead and share that with her. And likewise, if you're over on YouTube, you can just leave a comment in the comment section. We always love a thumbs up if you like the interview. And of course, if you have any questions or any issues, please share them with us as well. And thank you for joining me. Again, I do these Wednesday nights at 7 p.m. Eastern and 12:15 p.m. on Fridays. And we really just appreciate the opportunity to share our Better Nutrition thoughts with you. So thank you. And thank you, Amy.
Thank you so much.